August, a federal judge in Los Angeles threw out a lawsuit against the FBI's mosque outreach to Muslims in the United States. Anyone familiar with this mosque outreach program? I imagine all of you have some sense of what it entailed. According to records the ACLU obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI has amassed thousands upon thousands of pages of Muslim congregants' discussions regarding explosive topics such as frustrations over delays in airlines, the purchase of new land for a new mosque, where the congregants would be situated within the mosque, and the sale of fruit after services. These records reveal that the FBI designates virtually all these gleanings as positive intelligence, which authorizes their dissemination outside of FBI to other law enforcement organizations. Alarmingly, the records also show that a large portion of these have been designated or classified as secret, meaning that they were that the information was ascertained in the exercise of the FBI's national security authority, as opposed to the authority to investigate crimes of other nature. Gathering information about religious beliefs, practices, and innocent activities under the national security imperative and disseminating them widely as positive intelligence casts a cloud of suspicion upon Muslims, feeding the nation's paranoia about Islam. As an immigration lawyer, I wasn't surprised to hear these things. In my 20 years of practice, I have met with a great many Muslims. I have been privy to conversations about their relationship with law enforcement. When we discuss the opportunities that present themselves and the risks, very often there is occasion, in fact invariably there is occasion to share with this immigration lawyer contact with FBI and concerns about it. The percentage of clients and prospective clients who have been contacted by FBI, who have been invited to report regularly regarding the activities of fellow members of their mosques leads me to what I hope is a paranoid fantasy. But I truly believe that there's not a mosque in the United States that doesn't have an informant who regularly reports to the Federal Bureau of Investigations. So I'm not okay with this, and that's why I'm here. I'd like to speak to you, all of you, about your first line of defense. As I said, the lawsuit has been thrown out. Your first line of defense is your right to remain silent. Now from here on out, I'm going to ask you all to, I mean all, to participate for a couple of reasons. Because I'm not the most scintillating public speaker, and also because it's a great tool for learning. And I'm hoping that each of you will walk out of this, this brief presentation with a certain comfort level invoking your right to remain silent. You only get this through practice. So, to begin, I'd like to ask, this will sound like a tangent, but bear with me. I'd like to ask all of you to name the right, or more, let's put it another way, the liberty, the freedom, which in this land of freedom is most, well, I want to say, either most precious or just most talked about. What is that freedom? Freedom of? I heard some religion in the mix, and I respect that. But I think that speech comes closer perhaps to the heart of the matter. At least it comes closer to the heart of this presentation. Freedom of speech. Are there limits? Are there limits to freedom of speech?
Yes.
Of course there are. If at this very moment I shouted fire, yeah, that would cross the line. I might have somebody to answer to with another uniform not like mine. Okay, so there are limits. What are those limits? And this is a question that take out of the equation whether or not these questions are polite, whether they're appropriate, and think instead about whether they're legal. May I walk up to a stranger and ask him, "Hi, how you doing?" Is this within my liberty, my freedom of speech?
Yes.
Great, simple question. Okay. Can I walk up to someone else and say, where are you from? Is that legal?
Yes.
Okay. And walk up to someone I don't know and say, hey, you got papers? Is that legal? Yes. Now the responses get a little more muted. It's perfectly legal. It's perfectly legal. That has nothing at all to do with screaming fire in a crowded theater. It's perfectly appropriate. I haven't demanded that you do anything. Can I now walk up to another person, this gentleman here, and ask him politely, would you mind taking your clothes off?
Yes.
It is legal. I have threatened him. Okay? I've asked him politely. Now, does the question compel him to do this?
No.
No. Okay. Now, pretend I've taken off my lawyer costume and I put on a policeman costume. Okay? But this is a real one. It's not just a costume. I'm now Officer Zoltan. Now, I walk up to someone I don't know and I say, "Hi, how you doing?" Legal? Yes. I walk up to someone else and I say, what are you doing in this neighborhood? Legal? Yes. Once again, got papers? Legal. You see, when I put on my uniform, it doesn't doesn't curtail my freedom of speech. Now, individual police departments may have policies about what they want or don't want their police officers to be asking, but that's not a legal constraint, and it's certainly not a constitutional one. So, well, one step further. I'm wearing my policeman's uniform and I walk up to someone and I say, would you mind taking off your clothes? Legal.
Legal.
Look, I'm not saying that it's polite, I'm not saying that it's appropriate, I'm not saying that it's not going to get him into trouble with his, at his place of employment. That's not a great way to keep your job, if you're a police officer. But, where I'm going with this is, the question that I hear often posed, too often posed, is it okay for them to ask me, fill in the blank, Are they allowed to ask me, the other day he asked to look in my purse. Is he allowed to do that? And, well, duh. That's what we hear repeated so often. We live in a free country. Well, they do too. The police do too. So, okay. Whoa. If they get to ask us anything, what's our defense? What do we do?
We'll be quiet. Take the Fifth Amendment.
Take the Fifth Amendment. Indeed. What we do is we assert our right to remain silent. Okay? Their authority, or their right to ask, has nothing. There's a complete disconnect between their right to ask, which is just their right to speak, and your obligation to answer. So, okay. Are there times when a police officer has the authority to command? Command? Yes, of course they do. Okay. What are those occasions when the police officer has the authority to command us to do or say something?
Identify yourself.
Good. Actually, this bingo. One at a time. But that was what I was looking for. When he or she is asking for your name, you have the obligation to answer no matter the circumstance. Okay? So it's always within his authority to command that you identify yourself. Okay. Beyond that, police officer acquires the authority to command when, from the audience. You mentioned, you had an idea. What was it?
Someone is threatening.
Right. Okay. If you're certainly if you're threatening him, more broadly, you're a suspect. Exactly. When you're a suspect, when he reasonably believes that you have committed or you're committing a crime. Okay. Now, so you're speaking with an officer. He's approached you in the street. How can you discern whether he's commanding or asking? How do you tell the difference between those two? Somebody jumped right to the answer. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that, because it's fun to get there. Okay. Can you tell by tone of voice?
Yes.
Okay. Who in this audience is a parent? Raise your hand, please. Very good. Okay. Now, sir, when you want to, assuming your children are old enough to wash dishes, when you want them to wash the dishes, how would you ask? How would you ask them? What was that? Do it. No. Normally that's not what we, maybe the fifth time. But what about the first time we ask? How would we ask? Would you please wash the dishes? Now, when you speak to your child in that way, would you please? Do you have the authority to command at that time? Can you tell them, is this code, right? It's really, is it not an order? Okay. Well, so where I'm going here is that it's really not easy to tell by tone of voice. And what's more, as we're going to learn, the officer does not want you to go down that road, right? And will mask the boundary between what's an order and what's a request. Okay, so the way you learn whether an officer is commanding you is to, what was the question, the answer came? To ask. To ask. In that conversation with you and the officer, one of you knows whether there's an order being given. It ain't you. Okay, you ask. And because actually remaining silent is really awkward for us. We weren't brought up that way. It seems insolent. It seems very disrespectful. What I encourage people to do is to answer a question with a question. We've moved beyond, okay, you've identified yourself, and now the nice officer wants to know, so what are you doing in this neighborhood? This is where the participation I hope will pay off. But I hope to have each of you repeat and practice in your homes and share with your friends and neighbors is the simple expression, are you detaining me? Are you detaining me, officer? Right? And this is your right, your block. Okay? Your first line of defense. I hope you'll indulge me. Are you detaining the officer? On 3, 1, 2, 3.
Are you detaining the officer?
Thank you. Okay, great. Boy, this music to my ears. Okay, so you have asked the officer, you've asked the nice officer, are you detaining the officer? When you do this, you're communicating a couple of things to him or her. What are they? Anyone want to identify? What has the officer just learned about you?
Something about your
Yeah, you know something about your rights. You do indeed. And how hard is he going to have to work to get his answers? Real hard. Real hard. Okay. So, comes this dialogue. Let's try it. So what is it that you're doing in this neighborhood?
I'm just riding my bike in the street.
On 3, what should he have said?
Are you detaining the officer?
Great. Okay. So, now let's stop. Okay, freeze frame. You are the officer. I have asked you, are you detaining me? Think, officer. How will you answer? Where is on the menu? You're the officer. What is on the menu among, answer choices?
Do you have something you're worried about?
Well, okay, no. But I mean, what if you, apart from, continuing the dance of the questions, when you hear what was that? Yes or no. Yes or no? Yes. The menu has 2 items on it. Yes and no. Are you detaining me, officer? Well, yeah, that's not a tricky question, right? So, will he answer? You're the officer. Will you answer me directly? Why not?
The conversation is over.
Why is the conversation over at that moment?
You're free to go, and then you leave.
Okay, the answer. So, you, officer, my question to you. Are you detaining me, officer? Your answer?
No.
Bye.
Well, I see y'all.
Okay. Okay. Here's the other one. This gets tough. What's the other one? Are you detaining me, officer?
Yes.
Yes! Okay, and now, when you, the officer, say to me, right, yes, I am detaining you, what condition must be met for the officer to have the authority to detain you? You must be? Okay. The officer, in order to have the authority to detain you, the officer must be in his head?
Suspicion.
Reasonable suspicion. It's a reasonable suspicion that you have either committed a crime or you're committing one right now. Great, okay. Well, so, when he says yes, there's a subtitle and it says, I suspect you of committing a crime. When you know that a police officer suspects you of committing a crime, that's a very good time to get chatty, right?
No, God.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that not a good time to talk to a nice police officer? It's a very good time to invoke your Fifth Amendment rights. Okay, so what I'm suggesting here is a little bit of escalation rather than simply saying, I want to answer your question until I've spoken to a lawyer. But what if the question is, don't you think it's a little cold, or something? Do you really need to invoke your Fifth at that moment? Simply by engaging the officer in a question of your own, you can ascertain the nature of this conversation. And if the answer comes back, yes, well then it's time to invoke. That is the cue, right? Because you just told me you think I did something wrong, so I'm not just gonna talk, okay? But what if? Well, on the other hand, if the officer starts avoiding this question, right? You ask him, "Are you detaining me, officer?" Try this. Somebody who thinks they're really canny? Who thinks they're really clever? Okay, let's throw this out there. Are you detaining me, officer? Give me an officer's response.
Yes.
No. It is the kind that you're really likely to hear.
Not at this time. No.
What kind of questions would you hear in response? They're gonna dodge, right? You said you don't like.
Why? You done something wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Why? You done something wrong? Okay. Are you detaining me, officer? Are there other things that a police officer? You're all cops now. Other things that you might think of saying to me? I say, "Are you detaining me, officer?" You say, "Do I have a reason to?" Good. Yeah. Should I be detaining you? Good. Okay. What else? How about, it's only a question. Or, are you trying to hide something? You get the picture. On it goes. Now, when I do this presentation to, it's all my show. It goes to several times this length, and I play a video. And the video is of a civil libertarian. Somebody actually works for the Cato Institute, which is on the far right of the political spectrum. But they really don't like Big Brother. So he comes upon a checkpoint, and it's in Arizona. It's not at the border. It is far removed. And because it's not very far removed, I guess I forget what the perimeter is, the distance is from the border, but I want to say it's like 50 miles. Anyway, it doesn't cross the border, it's in the interior. And at these checkpoints, the Supreme Court has said clearly that the Border Patrol can stop cars and ask the drivers questions voluntarily, right? Just as a police officer would on the street. So this fella comes up to one of these checkpoints, and he rolls down the window, and the officer says to him, "Citizen," and now it begins. "Are you detaining me, officer? Are you a citizen? Are you detaining me? Are you a citizen? Are you detaining me? Are you a citizen? Are you detaining me? I have a right to ask these questions. Are you detaining me? This is my job. Are you detaining me?" And so on it goes. And the video segment lasts 90 seconds. And during that time, the question, "Are you detaining me?" phrased in different ways at different times, is asked 18 times. And there's no answer. It goes on for another, that's the part I play, because after that it gets kind of boring. But I mean, it goes on for twice as long. And the the driver to different officers poses the question another 30 times or so. All right, show of hands. After all this is over, raise your hand if you think he got busted. If he detained him. Raise your hand. Okay. Let's see. Raise your hand if you think he finally just gave in. And raise your hand if you just drove away. They just give, actually, that's what happened. Ultimately, he wore them out. He wore them out. It's coming back to where I started. The notion that we all seem to share nowadays, that we can find protection in, and our laws will somehow protect us from probing questions. That is grossly misguided. We will always be confronted by police officers and FBI agents and they're probing questions. They will always behave as if we share the general public's assumption that their right to ask equates with our obligation to answer. You know better, okay? And I would hope that leaving this room, as I say, you will begin to level the playing field. When you invoke your right to remain silent, if ultimately that's what happens, are you detaining the officer? Yes, comes the reply. When you bring a lawyer into that conversation, you're not clamming up. You're not cooperating. All you're doing is you're bringing in a referee. The problem with dealing with a nice police officer or the nice FBI agent, because in an act of patriotism, in an act of sort of benevolence, and in wanting to show that you've nothing to hide, it too is misguided. What we're doing is we're feeding the monster. The officer's reluctance to respect our right to remain silent, we created that. We fed it. And it's time to put it on a diet. In closing, I would ask you all to remember those words, and those are 2, 3. Are you detaining me, officer? A little louder. Are you detaining me, officer? Thank you. And practice, use them, share, please, share this. And it is, I would hope, my fond hope is over the course of time, officers who do this little dance, right, avoiding the question, that they'll learn their lesson. ultimately will tire them out too. Thank you. I've been